Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 716. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 716, number 3 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to human services, establishing the Minnesota African American Family Preservation and Child Welfare Act.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Agbaje, to address the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Today I am presenting House File 912, also known as the African American Family Preservation Act. Madam Speaker, I don't know if we should do the House language first.
Representative Agbaje has a motion at the desk. Let me just put my hands on it. The clerk will report the amendment.
Agbaje moves to amend Senate File number 716, the fourth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded DEA 912.
On the Agbaje motion to adopt the House language, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. Representative Agbaje, you have one more amendment at the desk. Do you want to explain the bill and then go to that amendment?
Yeah, I'll explain the bill first. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The purpose of this bill is to keep Black families in Minnesota intact when they first come in contact with Child Protective Services. Family separation has long been and continues to be a scourge of American society, with families of color especially feeling the brunt of the disruption, trauma, and pain. For those of you who know this bill, the biggest change in the House language is that this bill has an appropriation of $5 million to do a phase-in program in both Hennepin and Ramsey counties. The statewide implementation will come after the working group provides recommendations to be considered for statewide implementation after the pilot runs. During the pilot, the dedicated working group will review the program and best practices to develop a recommendation for statewide implementation. We know that it is families of color, particularly Black families, that are disproportionately overrepresented in the CPS system as compared to their population in the state. These families find themselves at the mercy of a court system that they know little about, with limited legal support. They are also at a disadvantage when engaging with county workers who may not understand the culture of the family and the community where that child comes from. And over the years, that continues to build a lack of trust and frustration in a system that is supposed to work on behalf of families. And this bill attempts to begin to address those disparities. The data from DHS and others show that African American, Hispanic, and children of 2 or more races are 2 to 7 times more likely than their white counterparts to be in and out of their homes compared to white children. And these disparities show up in the reporting, where African American children are 3 times more likely than their white counterparts to be reported to child protection. And it is noted that these disparities are a result of caseworkers assessing homes and often instituting removal proceedings even when there are no egregious allegations of harm. Caseworkers may see a family in poverty, and that poverty is manifested through housing insecurity or job insecurity or food insecurity. And instead of providing resources for the family, the knee-jerk reaction is to remove the child. Removing children as a response to poverty in Black families is actually more costly than providing those resources directly to the families who are poor. And it should not be the decision of the state to decide whether or not poor people can raise their own children. In order to provide some protections when facing the intricacies of the county and court systems, this bill seeks to require that counties engage in African American Child's Family Network, provide support to obtain services or resources for the family, have a right to counsel for emergency removal hearings, specify that a court cannot terminate an African American parent's rights on the sole basis of a failure to complete a case plan, and provide for cultural competencies trainings for county staff. Hennepin and Ramsey will start the process by showing how counties can use active efforts to preserve the family, or should out-of-home placement be needed, find safe, willing, and able adults in the family network to care for that child. The bill has also gone through revisions to address concerns that various interested parties have in implementing this bill. And one significant change is expanding the need of active efforts for other children who are disproportionately represented in the system. So that would be based on their race, their ethnicity, disability, or income status. The bill also notes that poverty should not be conflated with neglect, and this bill provides for grant funding to help families with material needs. The bill also begins to tighten language to ensure that children will get closer to a permanent placement, ideally with their own parents, or else with someone in the family or kin network if reunification with the parents is not a safe option. The bill codifies 2 policy efforts in DHS to ensure that Black children are properly reviewed and addressed: the African American Child Wellbeing Unit and the African American Child Wellbeing Advisory Council works both with families and the government to ensure better collaboration through recommendations and policy guidelines related to the child protection system. One of the concerns that has been brought up a lot on this bill is the Constitution. And constitutional issues are always a concern for any bill that moves forward. And what we do know is that the Constitution is that it hasn't been the most helpful document for enacting a just and fair society, and neither has the forthcoming jurisprudence. But that is an ongoing debate about how to repair harm done in this country to families when racism is used in specific ways like family separation. And so this bill is an opportunity to begin to determine how do we fight all of the biases in the system with the goal of keeping families together. And in order to mitigate those risks, that's why the bill covers more children and includes a severability clause to maintain the provisions in this bill that can be implemented without a consideration for race. At the end of the day, we all know that healthy families are vital to the success of our children and ultimately our state. Everyone has a stake in ensuring Minnesota's child protection system is fair and equitable. And your support of this bill will help decrease racial disparities and the injustices faced by these families. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Agbaje moves to amend Senate File Number 716, the fourth engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A4.
Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment is to make abundantly clear that the purpose of this bill is not to infringe on the sovereign rights of our tribal nations. The bill currently states that the provisions in this bill do not interfere with ICWA or MIFPA. The amendment reiterates that a mixed-race child who is Indigenous must follow the Indian Child Welfare Act procedures, which is currently federal law. Thank you. Oh, and I would urge a yes vote.
Discussion to the amendment. The member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Agbaje, for your work on this issue and for bringing this amendment. We know that the systemic realities of white supremacy and colonization negatively impact all of our kids, and it is important to recognize the legal distinction between the political identity of our Native kids is distinct and different, and so I think it is important that we make that clear in the language, and I encourage a green vote and thank Representative Agbaje for her work on this issue.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 716, as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion to the bill. The member from Crow Wing, Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll start off by reading a portion of this bill. To protect the best interests of African American and disproportionately represented children. Disproportionately represented children. If that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. Goes on to say, promote the stability and security of African American and disproportionately represented children and their families by establishing minimum standards to prevent the arbitrary and unnecessary removal of African American and disproportionately represented children from their families, and I don't think any of us want that. when people, especially children, are represented disproportionately. This subject will break your heart if you let it. It also breaks God Almighty's heart. You know, Jesus, you can read in the Gospels how much he loved children. When even his own disciples, his own apostles that he called forth, one day the crowds were gathering around Jesus, and the children were just trying to get to him. And the apostles actually shunned away the children. And they had missed something that Jesus was trying to teach them. And he actually rebuked them. And he said, "Let the little children come unto me, for such as these belongs to the kingdom of heaven." So this matter is very important to God, therefore it's very important to me, and I believe it's important to many of us sitting in these seats today. I'll read to you a section from the Old Testament, a direct quote from God Almighty from Malachi chapter 4. At the very end of it, at the very end, to close out what we call the Old Testament. I don't think that's what God calls it, but it says, "Remember the law of Moses, my servant, when I commanded him in the Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and the judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming and great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse." The relationship between a parent and a child is so important to God that he even says right here, if it doesn't happen, I'm going to come and strike the earth with a curse. Wow. God takes that relationship pretty seriously. To turn the hearts of the children to the fathers and the fathers to the children, because there was a breakdown within the family. And we see that happen today, where there's a breakdown in the family because a parent, and I'll just give this example. I worked in a faith-based drug and alcohol treatment program for 12 years, and I saw this a lot. I have a lot of experience with this. Where a child is removed from the home. I don't ever want to see that. When a child is removed from their parents, from the home. Ouch. And I have thoughts of, I wonder what that child is going through right now. Being pulled from their mommy or their daddy or both. If that doesn't get your attention and give you a gut-wrenching feeling, I don't know what will. But it certainly does to God Almighty. He is love. And that's no laughing matter. He is love. And every child loves their parent. And I believe that every parent deserves a second or a third or a fourth chance. And I understand the system, too, that we don't want to put a child in harm's way. But I had the privilege of seeing men come into that program and absolutely change their lives and get that next chance and be reunited with their children and go on to become a great father. I had the honor and privilege of seeing that for 12 straight years because it would happen every year. Sometimes few, sometimes many. And if the system is broken, we need to fix it. And if we have to do that one group at a time, I'm all for it. And that's why I'll be voting green on this bill today. I will be voting in support, Representative Agbaje, for this bill today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from the member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, there, but for the grace of God, go I. I think back on my own childhood, son of a black father and a white mother, and it never occurred to me that it might be even remotely possible that I could be taken from them. But when I'm honest and I look back at certain circumstances at certain times, my mom was on disability. My dad, he worked really hard, and because of that, he wasn't at home a lot. There was a period of time where he was working overnights, and he was going to school in the afternoon, and he was sleeping all day. So I effectively just didn't see him, except for on the weekends, on his days off, what he called his weekends, not necessarily Saturday and Sunday. And I can certainly think back on times when if somebody from outside had walked into the house and assessed the circumstances, in their arbitrary, subjective judgment of that moment, they may have labeled it neglect. But we were fine. We did just fine, my sisters and I. And when I contemplate the possibility that because of that snap, arbitrary judgment in the moment, I or my sisters could have been removed from everything we knew, everything we cared about, everything we were familiar with, and thrust into the unknown. It's unfathomable. I really can't begin to comprehend what that would have felt like. And yet that is a reality that black children and other children are facing here in the state of Minnesota. I also look back on, the parenting of my own children. I'm sure we can all, if we're really honest with ourselves and we sort through the fine sands of moments and incidents, there's some low points where we weren't on our A game on a particular day. And if somebody were to step in on that moment and say, aha, you're a bad parent, I'm gonna take your kid away. That's a punishment. That's a punishment that's on par with, if not worse, than incarceration. And we have this whole process for incarceration where you have to prove evidence of having committed a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. You go through this whole due process. You're judged in an adversarial process where you get the opportunity to face your accuser and defend yourself. And you get counsel. You have somebody sitting next to you, advising you. But with this process, with CPS, you're often left to navigate it without the aids. And the consequences are just as dire. And so I'm happy to rise in support of this today. I encourage members to vote yes. I highly suspect, although I can't say for sure, that we're going to see a very green board today. And that is because I think we all can value and all do value the importance of family and the importance of parenthood and keeping kids with their families. And I just want to point out, I don't want to take a lot of time today because this is not any one person's moment here today. First of all, thank you, Representative Agbaje and Representative Frazier, for allowing me to engage with this and answering my questions and answering some of the concerns from our side that we had side conversations about and clarified so we could understand what's happening here today. But I just want to make this point. This and the Indian Family Preservation Act that we passed last year are examples of two moments that have occurred in this chamber during this term where it's been really beneficial to muscle past the rhetoric, which is not always easy. There are certain words, certain phrases, certain claims that can push people back into their corner to where they don't want to engage with the problem anymore because they're triggered. And in this case, you really have to push back past the rhetoric and focus on the impact. What's the impact of what this bill is doing here today? The impact is that black kids are going to be able to stay with their parents. Or if not, if they can't, with an auntie, with an uncle, with a grandma, with a grandpa, in the community that they know, their community. And that impact is more important than any rhetoric. The pointing out of disparate impacts, it's real, it's true, that's been demonstrated. And I think, we can jump to the term white supremacy was evoked. That's one of those trigger words, one of those trigger terms, pushes people back in their corner, makes them defensive. I like to save that phrase for people who think that me and my sons are abominations, actual white supremacists, but be that as it may. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day why this disparate impact exists. It exists. And so let's do something about it today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Perez-Vega.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Bajay. Also, the authors that were in this chamber before that mentored us to be in these seats that we are here today to fight for justice and to fight on behalf of this, when we talk about our black community, when we talk about our black children. I want to thank Representative Rena Moran because she carried this, as we all, specifically when we go back to talking about our black roots, our ancestors of Africa, whether it's by the ways of the chains that came to the south of this country, that came up to Chicago, that came to St. Paul to build these spaces that are here, or my black and African roots of Borinquen, by ways of Ponce and Vega Baja and Loíza. We're here to work together in this body to make sure that we're speaking up against racial discrimination and child welfare that is a human rights violation. Today here in this chamber, we're doing the works of our ancestors. Representative Abaje, members of our Posse Caucus, we have held and we continue to hold these difficult conversations of the reality of what we spoke about, and I have the right to speak about in our Children and Families Committee when we first heard this bill, when we talk about bringing healing to wounds, and this is a step forward. And I look to many of you in the chamber of our communities that we know that this is a step moving pa'lante, a step of ache, of blessings when we talk about how we're leading in Minnesota. This isn't just about talking about children. This is the reality of talking about the history of discrimination that lives in the seeds that we birth. The reality of there is a privilege. There is a systemic privilege. There is a race privilege. And today we're taking those steps as Minnesotans and as elected officials that are placed here, regardless of what side of this chamber you sit on, that we're moving a step forward to say our communities all do better when we fight for one another, when we fight for what's wrong. What's wrong is that we even have to fight about this. What's wrong is that we even have to address that these are the realities. These are the phone calls that we hear from family members that fear that their kids are going to be taken away by the injustices that many folks don't face. And so with this saying, I want to thank the leadership. I want to thank those conversations that have not been easy and the continued conversations that will not be easy because we have to continue to fight for these initiatives and make things better. On behalf of folks that come from all over, this is a global issue that we're changing here today in the state of Minnesota, that we're leading by example by showing that we care about our kids, that we care about the kids that we birth, that we care about the kids that we're fighting for childcare for, that we're fighting for health care for, that we're fighting for their education for. But it starts, you know where? In the home, in the houses, with the nutrition as mothers that we know, as aunties, as uncles, as big cousins, stepmoms, village. Because in our communities, you don't necessarily have to be blood to be family. You become family by recognizing that you're surviving together. And today, I'm really proud, and I urge members across all sides, across all tribes, all barrios, all hoods, to think about the black kings and black queens that have lived with the pain, but that see justice today when we push for a green vote, that there are steps in making the future black kings and queens feel the worth and the praises of their ancestors who are with us today through this policy. I urge a green vote.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'll be brief, but thank you, Representative Agbaje, for your work on this. I know it's been a long, hard road, and you know, we've been talking about this bill since the time we got here. So it's really nice to see it on the floor. I want to come at this from the perspective of somebody who practiced family law. And when I say family law, I mean the whole family, not just child protection, not just, the whole family. And what I see from this, and I know we've been talking a lot about, like, do we do things that make adults feel better for children? But what I want to say in this context is there's nothing that makes adults feel worse than taking their kids away. And I have seen that again and again. And we all have faults. We all have things that maybe we've done wrong. But the second that you take someone's child from them, you remove their reason for getting better. And I have seen it with my own eyes. I have seen people relapse into addiction. I have seen people stop their therapy sessions. I have seen people literally give up, not try to find housing, just stop. And so if we can keep families together, if we can keep that glimmer of hope alive, that somebody still gets to interact and be a part of a family, to see their children, that's huge. And in my time doing family law, I have seen children taken away for things that would not have happened in other circumstances because of a house that's too dirty, because of lack of transportation, a whole host of things. And it's profoundly upsetting to those adults who are trying their best and who, for a number of reasons, systemic reasons, are unable to do everything that the system has decided is what needs to be done. So I really thank you for bringing this legislation forward. It's important to me, it's important to our community, and it's important to give our community hope for the future. Families deserve to be together. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hassan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a letter here from our former colleague, Rena Moran, who's currently the commissioner for Ramsey County. She has worked on this bill for many years, and she sent me a letter, and I'm going to read that letter before my comments. My name is Rena Moran, former state representative of District 62A, and 65A, 62A used to be mine, 65A, sorry, and current Ramsey County Commissioner of District 4 in St. Paul, the great-granddaughter of a slave. As a state representative, I was the first author of the African American Family Preservation Act. Today, I write in support of this bill. Family separation and separation of black children from their families is in the DNA of the United States of America. Night and day, you could hear men and women screaming, "Ma, pa, sister, or brother were taken without any warning." People were always dying from a broken heart. During a 1938 interview with Susan Hamilton, a woman still traumatized by slave actions she had witnessed as a child, Hamilton's recollection offers so much understanding of what black families faced during the enslavement. An incomprehensible level of sadness, pain, anger, and confusion and powerlessness. Sadly, today we continue to hear these stories, sometimes to deaf ears. For the past almost 45 years, families have come to this Capitol sharing and reliving traumatic stories over and over again of family separation from their children that should not have been occurred. In the late 70s, this issue of children being removed from their homes was one of the most pressing issues of the day, and here we are today, with the hopes that our cries do not fall on deaf ears again. It's not lost to me, and I think you should all take a moment to reflect that the separation of black families was a significant contribution factor to wealth building in this country. Make no mistake, not only was it profitable, it was also brutal, violent, a system of exploitation, dominance, and control. Today, the sadness, the pain, the trauma, and the injustice of yesterday is still with us. See and feel our pain, our historical pain. The question is, what will history say about this body of lawmakers? What will be the story, and how will you create a better tomorrow for black children in Minnesota and for children who are being disproportionately separated from their families? What will be the story we tell to our families of Democrats of 2024? We see you, we hear you, we're watching you. You have the power to begin to create a more fair, just, and equitable system that represents all of us. This moment in time matters. That was our former colleague, Representative Rena Moran, and I'm not going to say much. I think everybody have heard from others who are much more in tune with this issue. I used to be a Hennepin County child protection worker many years ago. One of the reasons why I left the county and I quit my job and I couldn't do it anymore was because it's a system that was set up to fail families. Social workers would go into homes and say their homes are dirty, so that means they don't care about their children. Not factoring in that a dirty home could mean that a person doesn't have the money to buy the ingredients to clean their house. Soap costs money, detergent costs money, and not factoring in mental illness, not factoring in trauma, not factoring in historical trauma, not factoring in poverty. So I say today that this bill is about justice. It's about keeping children with their families. It's about rewriting all the wrongs of the past. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members, today for the debate. Before I go into my closing remarks, I really want, as everyone has mentioned, I want to thank two really important people. Former Representative Rena Moran, who I don't think is here today, but she is the one who started this process, started with carrying the bill, and has really continued to help put black children first and foremost on this particular issue. And second, I want to thank Khalees Houston, one of the community advocates whose fierce passion and advocacy has been admirable to watch. We don't, that's good, thank you. So one thing that she says is that this bill is about safe adults. Sometimes what happens is people think we want people to stay, or we want children to stay in unsafe situations. That is not the case. This bill is only to provide resources and support for parents and family members who are safe adults to be with those children. So I'm grateful to both of those people for their previous efforts, and I'm happy to help carry this bill to the floor and hopefully get it across the finish line this year. This bill can be the support needed for many Black families and other families of color in Minnesota so that they do not have to go through the same pain of having a child taken away from them unnecessarily, and those children do not have to go through that same pain of being removed from their family and their community structure, thus disrupting their sense of family life and their sense of identity. With this bill, this is a first step along the way to ensuring that we can keep more families together and keep Minnesota a safe place and a good place to raise a family. I urge members to vote green.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Carroll.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye. Pulowski.
Pulowski, aye.
Pulowski, aye.
So members and folks in the gallery, after I announce the vote total, we're going to go back to business of the House on another matter. So the clerk will close the roll. There being 120 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to.